She stepped onto the dimly lit school stage with a worn music folder pressed to her chest, one she hadn't opened since the day her husband died. No one knew what piece she was about to play, or why her eyes were shining that way. But when her hands found the keys, the hall fell still. Something unforgettable was about to begin. Inside the quiet music room, Evelyn Hart gathered stray sheet music from the piano, her movements slow and careful, as if tidying away years rather than papers. The faint smell of wax and chalk dust lingered in the air. On the wall hung a framed photo of her very first student choir. The same year her husband had given her that piano now resting in the corner, its varnish dulled by time. 30 years of teaching had left their mark in every corner of that room. The uneven patch of floor where students always tapped their feet. The cracked window that hummed when the wind passed. Evelyn knew them all by heart. But the world outside her classroom was changing faster than she could keep up. When the teachers' meeting began, she sat quietly at the far end of the long table, a paper cup of tea cooling in her hands. The new principal, Henry Lowell, stood beneath the whiteboard, sleeves rolled up, a tablet glowing in front of him. "This year," he said, his voice bright and practiced, "the spring concert will be different. No more traditional choir pieces. We're going for a fresh, modern sound." The younger staff nodded eagerly. Evelyn offered a polite smile but said nothing. She knew this tone, excitement that often forgot respect. Her eyes drifted to the rain-streaked window as voices around her blended into noise. Words like rebranding and digital presence floated through the air, none belonging to the language of music she had devoted her life to. After the meeting, Henry approached her. His smile was almost kind. "Evelyn," he began, lowering his voice, "you've been such a cornerstone for this school. But maybe it's time to think about stepping back. You've earned your rest." That word, rest, landed heavy, like a closing lid. Evelyn nodded once. "If that's what's best for the students," she said quietly. Later, as the hallway lights dimmed, she returned to her room to pack. The silence felt louder than any applause she'd ever heard. She opened an old drawer and found her first concert program, its corners frayed. Her name printed beside her husband's, Evelyn and Thomas Hart, piano duet. She touched the paper lightly, remembering the small church stage, his hand squeezing hers before the curtain rose. Down the hall came laughter, young teachers talking about lighting effects and social media coverage. "She's lovely," someone said, "but she's from another time." Another voice replied, "Yeah, sweet, but the kids need energy now, not nostalgia." Evelyn closed the drawer softly and turned off the light. That night, her small apartment was wrapped in stillness. The piano by the window waited, its lid half open, the ivory keys reflecting the silver wash of the moon. She placed the letter from the school board beside the old metronome, then sat down, her back straight, her breath slow, her fingers hovered above the keys. For a moment, she hesitated. 30 years of guiding others, and she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to play for herself. Then softly, she pressed one note. It rang through the room, thin and fragile, yet achingly alive. Another followed, then another. The melody that emerged was one she hadn't played since the night her husband died, the piece they'd written together, unfinished. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept going. The music filled the quiet apartment, flowing past the curtains, out into the cool evening air. Neighbors paused at their windows, unsure where the sound came from, only that it made them stop whatever they were doing. Across town, preparations for the New Era Spring concert continued. Bright banners, glittering stage lights, students rehearsing pop harmonies. In all the excitement, no one noticed the empty space where Evelyn's piano used to hum, except one student. Lucy, 12 years old, stood by the door of the music room after class, her violin case clutched tight. She had been Evelyn's student since 3rd grade, shy, curious, the kind who listened more than she spoke. The next afternoon, Lucy found Evelyn sitting by the window of her classroom, labeling old sheet music for storage. "Miss Hart?" Lucy asked softly. "They said you're not coming back next year." Evelyn smiled, faint but warm. "That's right, dear. It's time for me to make room for new voices. Lucy hesitated. But you're the reason any of us can play at all. Evelyn looked at her, something bright flickering in her tired eyes. Then play well, she said. That's how you thank a teacher. As Lucy turned to leave, she asked one more thing. Will you come to the concert? Evelyn paused. I'll be there. You have my word. The night of the concert arrived quickly. The auditorium was filled with parents, cameras, restless students in sequined vests. The stage lights burned white against the deep red curtains. Evelyn sat near the back, wearing a simple navy dress. Unnoticed among the crowd, when the curtain rose, Henry's modern concert began. Flashing lights, pre-recorded backing tracks, songs that sounded loud but hollow. Evelyn folded her hands and listened politely. Then, just before the finale, Lucy stepped forward. She whispered something to the other students, then turned toward the audience. A hush fell. Her small hands lifted the violin. The first note trembled through the room, a melody no one recognized, but Evelyn did. It was hers. The song she thought had been forgotten, and in that instant, the air seemed to hold its breath. Something was about to happen, something that would change how they all remembered her. The first note from Lucy's violin floated into the air like a question waiting to be answered. It was soft, trembling, imperfect, and yet it carried something the bright stage lights could never touch. The audience shifted, the restless murmurs fading into stillness. Behind her, the other students exchanged uncertain glances, then began to join in. Tentative voices blending with the violin's fragile melody. It was Evelyn Hart's composition. The one she'd written decades ago in a hospital waiting room while her husband fought for his life. The piece had no title, only the word promise scribbled in pencil across the top of the page. She had never performed it, never shown it to anyone. Somehow, the students had found it tucked inside an old folder she'd left behind. Evelyn's breath caught. For a heartbeat, the room disappeared. The audience, the lights, the years. All that remained was the sound. On stage, Lucy's bow moved with growing confidence, her freckled face flushed with concentration. The choir followed her lead, singing softly at first, then stronger, finding the shape of the music as if guided by memory rather than notes. Principal Henry Lowell, standing at the side of the stage, frowned. "What is this?" he whispered to the music coordinator. No one answered. They were all watching the girl and the widow whose song was finally being heard. The melody rose higher, tender at first, then bold, unfolding like dawn after a long winter. Evelyn pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. Around her, parents sat frozen, the artificial smiles they'd worn for photos melting into silence. One mother reached for her husband's hand. A man in the front row blinked rapidly, eyes shining. Henry took a step forward, ready to stop the performance. But something in the audience's faces stopped him. No one was laughing or whispering anymore. The whole hall seemed to breathe together, caught in a spell. Evelyn stood slowly, unable to remain seated. She stepped into the aisle, her heart pounding like the steady beat beneath the song. When Lucy caught sight of her, her bow faltered for half a second, then steadied again. She smiled, the kind of smile that said, "This is for you." Without meaning to, Evelyn began to hum. Barely a whisper, just under her breath. The sound found its way through the hall, subtle yet clear. The choir heard it and followed, their harmonies deepening, growing warmer. It was no longer a concert. It was communion. When the last note faded, no one moved. The silence that followed was different, not the awkward kind that asks for applause, but the sacred kind that falls after truth has been spoken. Then, softly at first, someone began to clap. Another joined, then another. Within seconds, the hall was roaring with applause that felt endless, raw, and real. Lucy lowered her violin, tears glistening. "Miss Hart," she whispered, though Evelyn couldn't hear her through the noise. Henry Lowell approached the edge of the stage, his face pale, his hands uncertain. For once, the practiced calm of an administrator was gone. He looked at Evelyn standing in the aisle, her eyes shining, her posture straight despite the years. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "Miss Hart," he said, loud enough for the microphone to catch, "I believe this concert just found its heart." The crowd laughed softly, not mockery, but relief. Evelyn smiled and shook her head, stepping forward until she was near the stage. "It was never lost," she said simply. "You just had to listen." Lucy placed her violin down and ran to her, wrapping her arms around Evelyn's waist. The audience, unsure whether to keep clapping or cry, did both. Afterward, the hall emptied slowly. Parents lingered, shaking Evelyn's hand, thanking her as though she had given them something personal. A memory, a feeling, a reminder. Henry stayed behind, standing at the piano, the same instrument Evelyn had played for years. He turned to her quietly. "You know," he said, "I thought I understood what this school needed. But maybe I forgot what it already had." Evelyn smiled, her gaze soft but steady. "Music doesn't age." "Henry, people just stop listening." He nodded, speechless, and left her alone in the soft hum of the empty hall. The stage lights dimmed, leaving only the warm glow of a single bulb above the piano. Evelyn sat down at the bench, touching the worn keys. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the polished surface. Silver hair, gentle eyes. The weight and peace of years lived with purpose. She began to play again, not for the audience, not for redemption, but for the sheer joy of sound. The melody of promise filled the quiet once more, slower this time, tender as a farewell. Outside, through the open doors, fireflies flickered along the grass. The night air carried the music out across the schoolyard, where a few lingering students paused. Listening. Lucy stood by the doorway, her violin case in hand, watching her teacher bathed in soft gold light. When Evelyn finished, she closed the piano gently and looked toward the girl. "Go home, Lucy," she said. "You have your own music to write now." Lucy nodded. Smiling through her tears, Evelyn lingered a moment longer, then placed the worn sheet of music atop the piano. The title now rewritten in neat, steady ink. Promise, for every voice that once felt small. The lights dimmed completely, leaving only that white page catching the moonlight, trembling slightly in the breeze, as if the music were still there, quietly alive.